Mr. Mahran holds several high-profile roles across the array of chairman of the Executive Council of the Property and Casualty at the Insurance Federation of Egypt, member of the High Advisory Committee to the Board of Directors at the Egyptian Financial Supervisory Authority.
I guess there is a disconnect.
I'm sorry, I lost the connection for a minute. I apologize for that. We hopefully that will not lose it again. I'll continue with the introduction of Mr. Mahran, if you allow me. Mr. Mahran joined the insurance industry in 34. He joined Mr. Insurance in the reinsurance aviation reinsurance department until 93, and then here, which is earlier known as National Company for Insurance. Can you hear me now? Yes, I apologize for what has happened. I lost actually the internet connection, and now we are using a different device, so I apologize for that. I don't know where we have stopped at the introduction of Mr. Mahran. Um, um, I finished the introduction of Mr. Mahran that at end of 2007, he was entrusted with the opening of AIG branch in Qatar, where he continued to hold several positions until 2010 before moving to Zurich Insurance Group in Bahrain and Kuwait as general manager. Mr. Mahran holds a bachelor degree in commerce and a high postgraduate diploma in general insurance in Cairo from Cairo University, and he's a certified takaful professional from the Academy for International Modern Studies, and he's also an associate underwriting AICPCU. So I will move next to Dr. Vladimir Stejskal, and apologize me if the pronunciation of the name is not very proper. But Dr. Vladimir, welcome and thank you for joining us. Dr. Vladimir Dr. Vladimir is the head of Aon Analytics team in Prague. The team regional focus is Central and Eastern Europe, Nordic countries, Greece, Cyprus, and Middle East, and North Africa. The current team consists of 17 CAT modelers and 16 actuaries, which shows how important this unit for Aon. Dr. Vladimir joined Aon in 2007 as a catastrophe modeler, focusing primarily on the development of earthquake risk models. In the early years of his career, he was dealing with the development of earthquake models for Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, and former Yugoslavia. In 2010, he was appointed as head of the analytics team. His main focus is the team management and the catastrophe modeling for local as well as international companies in different regions, including Middle East and North Africa. Before joining Aon, Dr. Vladimir spent 4 years as a researcher in the Czech Academy of Sciences, and he holds a PhD from the Charles University in Prague. Welcome, Dr. Vladimir. Our next reputable speaker, Mr. Nader Anesi. Mr. Nader has over 13 years of experience in the reinsurance market. Prior to business development in international business from the New York Institute of Technology and is an associate of the Chartered Insurance Institute, ACI, in the UK, in Oman. Welcome, Mr. Nader. Last least, Mr. Mohamed Al Marhoun. Mr. Mohamed Al Marhoun is the managing director of Aon Reinsurance Solutions in Saudi Arabia. He currently serves as the Goodwill Ambassador for the Chartered Insurance Institute, where he plays a crucial role in assisting the CII within the region. He previously worked in various underwriting and management positions in Chap Arabia and Saudi Arabia. He was also a member of the Property, Casualty, and Reinsurance Subcommittee of the Saudi insurance market under SAMA's supervision, and he holds an FCII and other insurance, reinsurance, and management qualifications. Welcome, Mr. Mohamed Al Marhoun. So again, I would like to welcome all our reputable speakers. Thank you again for dedicating your time. And I will hand the floor to Mr. Mohamed Mahran so that we can catch up with the time lost by my issue with the internet connection. Mr. Mahran, please, if you can share with us, what do you think, or what is the perception from the direct insurance market? Why do you think that, yes, we have problems, but also at the same time, the reinsurers should treat insurance companies differently, and at the same time, they should understand that the one size does not fit all in terms of the treaty pricing and reinsurance underwriting. The floor is yours, Mr. Mohamed Mahran. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Momin. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I wish to start by thanking the fair for giving me the honor to be with you today. I would also like to acknowledge the very useful activities and webinars, as well as seminars and regional meetings held by FAIR since the journey of the active new Secretary General, Mr. Mohamed Mukhtar. Indeed, we are lucky to have him at the head. The current year, 2022, is about to finish, and it came to end a crisis and perhaps to start another bigger one. The COVID-19 almost finished, but the Ukraine war started on 24th of February. At the first glance, we can say that 2022 was a positive turning point on the medical and the life science due to the significant decrease in the COVID claims. However, for the P&C or property and the casualty, things were a bit undefined due to 3 wars we are facing. The first war is fighting against nature, the natural catastrophes that occurs, such as Hurricane Ian, flood in Australia and South Africa, and the hailstorms in France, etc. In addition, the second war will be the famous, or better to say, the infamous Russian-Ukraine war. And the third war, it's between the central bank and the time in order to bring the inflation down all over the world. Clearly, with every war, there are victims and only the smartest would survive. I hope we as a direct insurance will find a way not to be one of the victims and would be the survivors and probably the winners. My comments will be in 2 parts. One is message to my colleagues in the direct insurance, and the second is request to the reinsurance community. Let's start with the direct insurance, and I put a disclaimer. Despite some of these messages will seem basic, but usually no harm for reminding ourselves even with the basic things. My first comment is many of the treaties will have or already has an indexation clause. In view of this, claims has to be done as rapidly as possible in order not to be subject to this clause, which may put the cedents in clear disadvantage due to inflation. Second message is reassessing the reserve on a regular basis, probably shorter than what we used to do in the past, and to keep the reinsurance advised of whenever possible, especially for the cases which it comes with the US currency. Separation, I mean US or hard currencies or currency different from the local currency. Third would be the separation between the policies issued in the hard currency and those issued in a local currency. And the reason for this is to elevate the inflation factor, which I am sure Dr. Vladimir and the colleagues will put some light on it. And this is in order to elevate the inflation factor and also provide fair assessment to the portfolio, especially when we are talking about the XOL treaty. Get yourself involved. This still, I am with the message to my colleagues in the direct insurer. Get yourself involved in the pricing discussion and try to understand the rationale behind the changes requested by the reinsured at renewal. I believe this webinar is an invitation to all of us to spend more time either with our brokers or leaders to understand the method used and probably the factors affect either we are working on the bearing costs or working on the exposure or whatever factors also will be taken into consideration. Locally, and perhaps regionally, we are fortunate in 2 ways. One, the Nat Cat exposure is not major concern, except, of course, for few countries. Number 2, being non-litigious countries, in majority of our countries, liability exposure for long-tail claims is considered also moderate. As such, inflation factor may not be a major factor in the pricing whenever we are talking to our colleagues on the other side of the table, i.e. the reinsurers. We must ensure that there is no leakage in the reinsurance cover. This is to say, to to buy the limits required according to the portfolio analysis in the US dollars, for example, or whatever currency we are using. In other words, to optimize our reinsurance purchases in this difficult time. Now, and I hope we still have some time, I am moving to the important topic, which is my message, or better to say, request to the reinsurers. So since we have some of the colleagues here from the reinsurance, I start with saying, please, we are mostly considering ourselves as emerging markets, even though we are doing, or at least majority of us are doing a good job in managing our figures, managing our results. As explained above, exposure is also moderate. Our reinsurers programs will likely be affected inevitably, as they are mainly controlled by the reinsurance giants, probably in somewhere else in the world. We have also witnessed some clear hardening signals as the pricing of the reinsurers are excessively high due to severe losses from the international market, which we appreciate, but applying the same rates and same standards to other less developed markets makes it a challenge. Some other noticeable moves are reducing capacity, increasing retention in US dollar, reducing commissions, reducing the event limit, especially for the engineering and the property deals. In addition to all of the above, there are common impacts on the reinsurance sector. We have the Russian and the Ukraine war that is disturbing the whole world and our industry in some instance. We are unable to find markets for such coverage to cover, for example, marine comes from this area. Although we have to admit this is not a normal circumstances, we also believe with each crisis there is an opportunity, and clearly with applying the risk factor, we should be able to offer service to our clients. Another issue we face, and particularly we have seen this in Egypt, reinsurance market depend on the global CAT modeling tools. But unfortunately, it is not in our case based on full fact and history, but rather on assumption due to the lack of data in our region in general. This makes them sometimes increase the rates on certain perils where these scenarios are least to happen in the country. I'm just saying that I don't have so much other than this, but I have a couple of points also to not to feel you, to let you boring. Retention, a change in the local currency. For Egypt, for example, and I am sure this is applicable to many of the emerging markets, is facing the devaluation of the currency, which is causing internal obstacle. Clearly, increasing the retention on the local currency cannot be looked at. It is a problem of the reinsurers. We understand that this is our local problem. However, it's also important from our side to share our pain, and then we will have some understanding whenever we comes to our since we are members in the FAIR Federation, I'm asking all the regional players in Africa and the Asian reinsurance challenging time for all of us, but without any doubt, rating, I mean the financial rating would require, and unfortunate, many of the companies' rating have been affected, and they are really missed in this time as they are aware of the market conditions. I hope my notes are quite concise and summarized, and definitely, again, thank you very much for your patience and listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much indeed, Mr. Mahran. Your point of view really shed light on the problems and the pain the direct insurance market has. And I feel some sympathy also with the insurance companies, because from one side, they are getting some pressure from the reinsurance to adjust and to increase rates and to tighten the terms and conditions. But on the ground, they also face problems with the clients, because the clients will have to increase the sums insured of their properties, and at the same also time, the insurance, the direct insurance or the direct clients are also having economic pressure, because their margins actually have significantly squeezed by the waves of inflation and so on. So I feel that the insurance company now is between two stones. From one side, they are unable to implement some adequate terms and conditions and prices to their own clients, whereas the reinsurance companies are actually asking for additional rates and tighter terms. But before moving to that point, I would like also to pick the brains of Dr. Vladimir, and thank you again for being with us here, Doctor, on the natural catastrophes, particularly and nat cat perils, how they impact the portfolio and the pricing of the reinsurance, particularly in areas that are not so exposed, like for example some of the areas here or countries in the North Africa and Middle East are not so exposed to natural perils like other countries. So where did that come from? The pricing. What are the pricing models that are in use? How we can capture the right data so that the pricing also become adequate? Some of the things that we have noted throughout our experience, that when you provide the same set of data to 2 or 3 different cat modelers, they come back with different outcomes. If you can highlight that to us, Doctor, the floor is yours, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Please, Dr. Vladimir.
Thank you, Mr. Mohamed. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks very much to the whole Federation FAIR to be invited to this session and to this webinar. Let me now, in my slot, introduce the basic principles of the cat modeling and address the topics which you just raised in your introduction. I will now try to share my presentation on the screen. Hopefully, you will be able to see it.
Not yet, Doctor.
Just a second.
Okay, now we can see it. Thank you.
Okay, I will switch to the slideshow mode. Is it visible? Okay.
Yes, visible, Doctor.
Good, thank you. So, basically, as just mentioned by Mr. Mohamed Mahran, natural catastrophes and climate-related risks is one of the 3 wars we are now fighting. And even if you just mentioned, and very correctly, Mr. Mohamed, that especially North Africa and Middle East are not very well exposed regions, we have to accept one single fact, and this fact is that the natural catastrophe can strike in any place of the world. Of course, with different frequency, with different severity, but it can basically occur everywhere. So all those types of natural catastrophes which I have on the screen, geological, hydrological, meteorological, wildfires, or even space disasters, which sound very unlikely but might happen, can occur in the region where the federation has its own members. Now, when we look back in the past, of course, you will not be surprised that the catastrophe and weather-related losses caused to the insurance and reinsurance industry are increasing. So every decade is becoming more and more expensive than the previous one. Where does it come from? Is it related to the worsening hazard, worsening climate? Is it related to the economic growth and population growth? We can hear very often the arguments that the climate is changing, climate is worsening, and it should have an impact on reinsurance pricing. So where does the worsening come from? Let's have a look on the next slide. What we can see here. On the left-hand side, you can see the population growth since 1970, and the population has more than tripled. On the right-hand side, you can see an anomaly of global temperature. And indeed, the global temperature is growing as well. And currently, on the global level, we are plus 1.1 degree warmer compared to the situation before the Industrial Revolution. So yes, the climate is changing, and global but is still not entirely clear to what extent does this impact the occurrence and severity of natural catastrophes. Because uh, one should differentiate between hazard and risk. On this slide, I have two pictures. One of them is city of Shenzhen in China now, and the same city in 1964. So you can see that basically the landscape has changed completely. Lots of expensive properties were constructed, and this is probably way more important than any possible changes in climate and weather-related perils. So I would even say that the growing risk is more relevant than the growing hazard, which is a result of natural processes. But in the end of the day, it is all becoming expensive. But let me go back very quickly to the climate change topic again. The climate was changing throughout the whole history of the Earth. So here we have the fluctuations of global temperature over the past 540 million years. You can see that the fluctuations were enormous, and many periods were much warmer than we are now. We are now living in a relatively cold period. So the question is, do we need to be concerned? And the answer is probably yes. We shouldn't ignore the current situation because what is concerning is the speed of change. And the speed of change, we can see it here. So here we are looking some 2,000 years back. And again, we can see very nicely regular or irregular fluctuations of the climate. But what we can see over the past, let's say, 100 years, it's a big jump. And this is probably something which we need to be concerned about. So this was my introduction, just to briefly talk about catastrophes in general and climate-related issues. And now I will continue with the modeling to understand which modeling capabilities do we have and which models do exist. So very simply saying, the catastrophe modeling is as old as the property insurance. Even some 200 years ago, people were trying to quantify the accumulations of insured properties in case of large fires. So at that time, fire was considered very serious event. There was no mitigation, no fire brigade, so it was really serious. But really, the first real catastrophe modeling companies occurred only in late 1980s, and it all started in United States. Currently, at the moment, we have four large catastrophe vendors with very well reputation. RMS, risk management solutions. This is probably the most well-respected one and the one taken by reinsurers the most seriously. Then we have a provider, VRisk, formerly known as AIR, Applied Insurance Research. Then we have CoreLogic company with many models available for Africa, Asia Pacific, also Middle East, and Impact Forecasting, which is a catastrophe modeling company which is owned by Aon. So it's basically a broker catastrophe model vendor. What are the models available in our region? Here I'm focusing mostly on Africa, Middle East, and South Asia. In this map, we can see which earthquake models are available from those four vendors. You can see lots of gray areas, especially in Africa. On the other hand, quite a sufficient coverage in South Asia and Gulf countries, but really lots of gray spaces in Africa. So as mentioned by other panelists, really lots of uncertainty and lots of unknown perils. When we look at the same map from the perspective of weather-related catastrophes, it's probably even worse. We have even less models for weather-related events. To a large extent, African countries not covered at all. On the other hand, quite a sufficient coverage for countries affected by tropical typhoons, which is India, Philippines, Indonesia, and the islands in Indian Ocean. Now, very briefly, I don't want to overload you with technical facts. I will try to explain how the probabilistic cat model works. We should remember 3 steps. The model always works with insured locations, and this is the data which our clients, insurance companies, are able to provide us. So the modeling is as good as is the information which we enter into the model. Then the model generates thousands and thousands of stochastic events, from very small events up to very, very extreme events that never happened so far, but they might theoretically happen. And the hazard, like wind speeds, water depth, earthquake intensities, is then converted by the model into the financial losses through so-called damage functions, which translate the hazard intensity into the damage ratios. On the top of it, we have some financial engines that calculate monetary losses for individual events and translates them into the exceedance probability curves. And this is already the relation which you probably know, the relation between the probability and financial loss, which your company might expect. We will come to more detail on a later stage. This was just an introduction to explain how the cat model works. So let's have a look how we can use catastrophe models for risk quantification and not cat risk pricing. Reinsurance was the very first segment of the insurance industry that adopted catastrophe models. And it all started with very simple but very logical questions like, is my portfolio exposed to natural hazards? And if yes, what is the main peril and what are the monetary losses I can expect? Then, if the nat cat risk is somehow material, then what is the reinsurance protection which I need, and what is the decent price I'm expected to pay for that? One is very important that actually for placement of catastrophe treaties, the modeling is essential. The most typical outcome of the catastrophe modeling, we can see it here on this picture. It's a relation between the probability or return period on the x-axis and monetary loss which your company can suffer on y-axis. Of course, typically, multiple perils can be present for the cat capacity or a proportional event limit. We are always looking at the main peril, but also secondary perils might be very relevant, especially for pricing of lower non-proportional catastrophe layers. Now, again, here we are looking at the model output in a more detail. So here we have the well-known exceedance probability curve, sometimes expressed as a table with individual return periods, let's say from 5 to 1,000 years, and monetary losses. At the same time, we might even have a so-called event loss table, which is a list of all stochastic events and their losses, which can be conveniently used for pricing the catastrophe contracts or for structuring and optimization of the reinsurance treaty of our client, which is an insurance company. When looking at the results of the catastrophe modeling, you can typically see also two different representations. So-called occurrence perspective, OEP, which basically quantifies the one maximum event that might happen within 1 year. And this is typically used to take a decision about the catastrophe limit, or annual aggregated perspective, which is a sum of all events which you might suffer throughout the year. So the AEP perspective, the annual one, is typically higher, while the OEP is lower. Here I have one nice example where I show the difference between annual and occurrence perspective for individual and for India earthquake and typhoon. So earthquake is light blue, tropical storm is dark blue. What is very relevant is the fact that for earthquake, you can hardly have on a frequent basis multiple events per year. However, for tropical storm, the annual aggregation of losses is quite material. And let's say for some short return periods, we can see that the presence of multiple events in 1 year is quite frequent. And this is, of course, something which creates a pressure on the bottom layers of catastrophe contracts, where the relevant weather-related catastrophe perils are present. So those were the individual perils, and of course we shouldn't forget that multiple perils can affect the catastrophe contracts. So typically, the decision about the capacity and limit is taken based on the main peril, which in many cases might be earthquake. It would be, for example, in the Gulf countries, certainly in North Africa. It's not entirely clear what would be the conclusion for Southeast Asia or other African countries, but very often there are many other perils which are not that relevant to set the catastrophe limits, but might very materially impact the bottom layers of catastrophe contracts, and even worse, the net retention of the insurance company. So typically the secondary peril might contribute with more than one half to the bottom layers, can cause substantial deterioration of the company net retention, but of course, they are not a major drivers of the top layers and catastrophe capacity. But of course, those perils need to be properly considered to understand the proper structure and pricing of the reinsurance contract. On the maps which I shared with you in the previous slides, you had a chance to see that in many territories there are no models at all. So we should have in mind that not all the perils are modeled. An example, let's say, flooding in North Africa. I'm not aware of any model vendor which would have a model for a North Africa flood. But of course, there are multiple models for earthquake. So some perils are not modeled at all, but they can be present. And at the same time, even if certain peril is modeled, it can have some unmodeled components. Like, for example, fires caused by earthquakes. Hardly any models in our region do capture the fires that might be triggered by earthquakes. Also, tsunamis triggered by earthquakes. This is also very frequently not modeled. Similar to that, precipitation flooding caused by typhoon is not covered by every model. So anytime we look at some results of catastrophe modeling, we should ask ourselves, or we should ask the provider of the modeling service, which perils and which effects are properly modeled to make sure that our reinsurance contract is structured properly. Of course, in some cases, we can even have multiple models. And as mentioned by Mr. Mohamed in the introduction, it can easily happen that reinsurance company will send the data to 3 different brokers and receive multiple different outputs. And it can indeed happen. To a certain extent, there is of course an uncertainty around the data which we receive and around the assumptions which we adopt for the modeling. But at the same time, there can be many differences in the modeling software itself. And that can be given by the different assumptions of around the hazard. So, for example, the frequencies of stochastic earthquakes or typhoons are very different. Also, the vulnerability components of the models might be different. So the way of how the hazard severity is converted into financial damage might very differ model by model. And also the individual models might react with different sensitivities to the specific risk profile of the individual companies. What can I do in such a situation? Of course, I should understand the models and I should understand the differences. There might be multiple conclusions. The user of such different results might choose one single model. based on the evaluation of the outputs and evaluation of the models. You can adjust a single model, or you can even blend multiple models to create some average. Even this is an approach which some companies take. So my colleague Mohamed will talk a bit more about catastrophe pricing and how the reinsurers price the reinsurance treaties. I will only briefly mention on these slides how the pricing works from the technical perspective and what drives the pricing of the catastrophe treaty. So in the first place, it's for sure the company or market loss experience, but also the general perception of the NatCat risks in case there is no experience at all. And for example, in Gulf countries, when it comes to earthquake, there is really no loss experience at all. Then, of course, the pricing is related to the exposure and NatCat modeling results. So reinsurers are typically looking at the modeled expected losses as they are generated by the models to the individual layers of the catastrophe treaty. Also, volatility of the modeled losses is important, and also the probability of attaching and exhaustion of the treaty. So, of course, the treaty which is attached every 5 years is priced differently compared to the treaty which is attached every 20 or 50 years. And of course, the outputs of the catastrophe modeling can be used very conveniently for additional optimization of reinsurance purchase. So before the insurance company goes to the markets, it's up to us, up to the broker, to advise with the best possible structure, which protects you, and at the same time, it creates some reasonable balance and compromise of the proper protection and reinsurance pricing. There are also some global aspects that impact the pricing and that can be affected by the modeling. It's for sure the global catastrophe activity. So as mentioned at the very beginning by Mr. Mohamed Mahran, the large catastrophe events like Hurricane Ian in the US, Gulf of Mexico, that will impact the pricing everywhere. It's also about the global reinsurance capital and its availability, but it is also about the diversification benefit of some territories. So, for example, Africa or Asia would be perceived differently than the key and most expensive territories like United States, Japan, or Western Europe. And in my last section, which will be relatively short, I will only briefly mention the importance of the data which we receive for the purpose of catastrophe modeling, because there's also uncertainty around the data, and the modeling outputs are only as good and as accurate as is the data. So the catastrophe models, they can work with multiple assumptions, and they can differentiate between multiple types of the property. So the model can take into account the enormous level of details about the occupancy of individual insured risks, insured coverage, construction, age, height of the building. It can model multiple insurance and reinsurance terms, not only policy limits, sublimits, deductibles, but also the reinsurance facultative and obligatory contracts. I would like to focus on a couple of details which we believe are important to be captured in the NatCat modeling data which we receive for the modeling. So first of all, it's the occupancy or the economic activity of the insured risks. We typically differentiate between the main groups, which are industry, commercial objects, householders, and many other subcategories which can be reflected by the models. Of course, when subjected to the ground shaking, to the severe storm, each object reacts differently. Now, of course, the construction of the risks needs to be taken into account very properly because in many countries, the very strict and proper design codes are imposed by state. And if the buildings are built properly, they can resist and they can sustain substantial levels of the ground shaking. So another parameter which we might take into account. Also, the other details like insured coverage, buildings, contents, BI, which is basically very, very much loss loss making can be reflected by the models, and it is something which might impact the results, which are then communicated to the reinsurer and which are used to structure and design the reinsurance contract in the proper way. Last probably point which we should take into account is the proper information about the location of the insured risks. The models can typically work with multiple different resolutions. So if we receive the data on some low resolution units like governorates in Egypt, we can really work with it, but we have to apply simplifying assumptions. Therefore, it's much more convenient to provide some finer divisions, like, for example, individual districts, addresses, or coordinates of the individual risks to make sure that it's really modeled properly with highest possible resolution. And the last information, which we shouldn't ignore in the NatCat modeling data, is a proper capture of the insurance and reinsurance terms. So, for example, if the company applies the sublimits for natural perils, it needs to be properly reported and reflected in the model. Same with deductibles and same with the underlying proportional contracts like facultative, quota share, and surplus treaties. So this is basically it from my side. And to conclude, I would say that catastrophe modeling gives us a very important opportunity to model the risk properly under the current challenging market conditions. It can take into the account a wide range of scenarios, even scenarios that sound very impossible, very unlikely, but they can happen even in regions where we haven't seen that much of catastrophe activity in the recent decades. And the models can reflect many details about insured properties, and very often the models can take into account much more details that are currently reported by the insurance companies in the other regions. And last but not least, a catastrophe model is an important weapon for a broker to help insurance companies to structure and place the catastrophe reinsurance. So, colleagues, this is it on my side. Thanks for the invitation. Thank you for your attention, and of course, happy to answer any questions once the situation allows.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vladimir. This is very interesting, but at the same time, still it shows us how complicated is the CAT modeling. But at least you have given us in simple form and simple words, at least the basic idea about it. And actually, as you have mentioned, Doctor, that you are not only modeling the CAT events that have already happened, but also the ones that could happen, and we don't know when it will happen and when and how bad it will strike. And I recall, I mean, from my previous service in the GCC, that the heavy rains were happening, I mean, regularly, but because of the buildings have taken the natural paths of the rain going to the sea. Actually, the flood of water have gone somewhere else and has actually covered districts that have never seen floods before. So actually, it is a multi-dimensional issue. Either it is because of the global warming and the extreme weather patterns, but at the same time, the urbanization and the heavy construction and inhabitation of the areas that, as you have mentioned and have shown us, in 1964, it was only like a valley with very few small buildings, but now it is high rises and very congested area, full of occupants and full of values. So these things actually affect definitely the pricing and at the same time the view of the CAT modelers. One of the most important things you have mentioned, Doctor, as well, is the capturing of data, because we need to know how these buildings are built, from what material, how many stories, what are the contents, and the that are stored in this building, because all these things affect the pricing and modeling of the cat exposure. I just would like to mention now that we are currently having 232 participants. A few minutes ago, there were 234, now 33, 233. So this shows how important and how interested the people are in such important webinar and discussion topic. If you allow me now, I will take now the word to our good friend, Mr. Nader Onesi. And he is the one actually who is getting most of the blame, because the people will tell you, Nader, that we have been, partners for many years. And, sometimes our treaties make losses, sometimes make profits. But now we feel that you are letting us alone. You are just dumping us somewhere and telling us, guys, this is what I want as a reinsurer, and whether you take it or leave it. I know that this is not the case, but how we can bring simplify your own problems and where you come from, so that also the direct insurance companies understand why the insurers want terms and conditions and prices to change. So thank you, Nader. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mohamed. First, allow me to say thank you for the Fair Federation, and thank you personally for inviting Omadi to take part of this great initiative. When I was asked to talk to you on this occasion and on this webinar, it was a real pleasure and honor to be here today with you. The last two sessions from Mr. Mahran and Dr. Vladimir has been extremely beneficial for me, and hopefully my presentation will add value to the whole audience. I think we are taking the blame as reinsurers, but I think we are on the same boat with everyone. And I wouldn't say we are more impacted by the current market conditions. I can say we are equally, but also it's true that we are maybe more impacted by the current market conditions. And my friends from Aon can also confirm the retro market and what is going on in the retro market. So allow me a second to share my presentation. So I will hopefully I will be able to answer Mr. Mahran, and I will be able to convince the insurance market about the current market environment and how it's impacting all insurance company and reinsurance company. So today my presentation, I will highlight about the market environment, what is going on in the market and how is this affecting the treaty pricing. So as I highlighted, I will start with the market environment, and then I will walk into inflation, retro cost, the cost of capital, climate change, the geopolitical risks, and how each one of these items is impacting the reinsurance pricing. And finally, and as we say, behind every challenge, there is an opportunity. I think this is an opportunity for insurers and reinsurers to take advantage of what's going on and differentiate themselves between peers. So the current market environment, what we call now is the three C's, is not strange to any one of us. Climate is one of the main topics for the last few years, and we have seen the raise in the nat cat losses. Dr. Vladimir has also highlighted that. The geopolitical conflict, and more precisely the war in Russia and Ukraine, is creating disruptions in the supply chain. It's causing high inflation rate, is affecting the productivity of the business. And unfortunately, the capital is declining because of the increased interest rate, which is caused by the asset, most of the assets. So drop in the assets. The reinsurance market remain a market characterized by or shaped by supply and demand. The environment of the excess capital, which used to be there for the last few years, is no longer there. And currently the same is replaced by the capacity capacity shrunk and increased demand and change in risk appetite. So to start with the climate change, climate basically is a long-term change in the average weather pattern. It is caused by natural variability, natural forcing, and mostly by human caused forcing. Changes observed in Earth's climate since the 20th century are driven by human activities, particularly the fossil fuel burning and causing an increase in CO2 emissions. The effects of climate is the increased warming of the planet, causing changes in the atmosphere, ocean, and biosphere. The increase in the frequency and intensity of the global weather shocks, such as heat waves, droughts, and floods and tropical cyclone, what we call secondary perils. With increasing the CO2 emissions, the carbon observation by the ocean and the land becomes less effective, causing CO2 to accumulate in the atmosphere, leading to global warming or higher warming. As a consequence of climate change, impacts such as collapse of ice sheets, abrupt changes in the ocean circulation, increased extreme events, and significantly higher warming can no longer be ruled out. Now, this is just a summary about climate change. Later on, once I enter into the part where I will explain how every item impacts the treaty reinsurance pricing, we will speak more about climate change and how it's impacted the reinsurance pricing. In terms of geopolitical conflict, geopolitical conflict is is the number one risk to the corporate world. It has many challenges, including it increases uncertainties and volatility in previously stable countries. It creates a decline and commitment to the international rule of law. It leads to greater risk exposure, a complex supply chain. It creates currency devaluation, rising inflation, increased cyber risk and connectivity, and increased protectionism. There are many classes of business affected by the geopolitical risk or the conflict, but those are the primary lines of business affected, mostly PV, cyber, credit, travel, marine, engineering, kidnap and ransom, and aviation. For example, on the PV side, the market is widely expected to incur a loss between $3 to $5 billion as a direct consequence of the Russia-Ukraine market. The aviation market, for example, the industry losses can go up to $10 billion. The marine is also another area is expected to be affected by the losses. However, we have seen now how underwriters are responding to the risk of marine and increasing the rates for war and SRCC within the geographical scope of Russia, Ukraine, or Belarus, more specifically the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. Cyber attacks is becoming more familiar now with this conflict, with multiple claims already occurred and more are expected to happen. However, a cyber attack caused by war is usually excluded, yet the current wording is creating a dispute between reinsurers and insurance companies and insurance company and clients. Currently, reinsurers are looking at the wording to basically have a clearer exclusion of war when it comes to cyber. Engineering has been affected definitely on the production side because most of the engineering companies throughout the world are suspending their operation in Russia and in Ukraine as well. So also again, similar to climate, we will also explain the geopolitical risk and the impact on the reinsurance pricing. Now, in terms of capital, unfortunately, the current market environment indicates a mismatch between the demand and supply. On one hand, the macroeconomic geopolitical conflicts and the frequency of extreme weather events are causing investors and reinsurers to reassess their view risk and appetite of nat cat exposure. On the other hand, inflation is driving increased demand for cat reinsurance at a time where the supply is tightening. Furthermore, a number of reinsurers have withdrawn totally from the property cat market, while most of them are maintaining their existing position. And when we are saying they are maintaining their existing capacity level. In some cases, this means that they will have to reduce their participation on existing business because they are maintaining their capacity level and not their share. So because most of the treaties we are seeing today, we are seeing increase in exposure because of inflation, obviously. Now the capital has declined by 11% in the first half yearly 2022, according to my colleagues in Aon, and also of course other reports as well. This is highly driven by the losses in the investment portfolios of the companies or in the equity of the company. Also, another reason why the decline of capital by 11% or $75 billion happened in the first half year of 2022 is because of the euro weakening against the US dollars early this year. Now, the capital projection by end of the year is projected to drop by 8%. And this drop in capital will be the first time since the financial crisis in 2008. The alternative capital is more or less stable and has only dropped by $1 billion. So this was basically my summary, and now we will look at the items that is basically impacting the treaty reinsurance pricing. Before we start with that, we need to see how the premium is established. So premium, everyone knows that, but it would be good to go back to basic to understand what is really happening here. The premium is established with three main components: is the loss cost, the expense, and the return on capital. Obviously, the loss cost would be impacted by the inflation, and the loss cost because it's the expected losses plus claims-related expenses such as loss adjuster fees, the court fees, etc. The loss cost is based on burning cost or exposure method, and this is definitely expected to go up, as we mentioned, because of inflation. We will take an example later on about inflation and how it's impacting the treaty business. The expense include operational expenses, acquisition costs, and the retro costs. On the retro course, higher retro would imply higher expense. The operational expenses, the salaries can also go up because of wage inflation and increase in general expenses like electricity, maintenance, travel, etc. And to maintain expense ratio at a reasonable level, the insurer might negotiate down the acquisition cost, because this is one of the items where it is the easiest item to control from a reinsurance perspective, because when it comes to operational expenses like electricity and maintenance, this is fixed costs and not controlled by reinsurance companies. Wage inflation, if there are some regulatory requirements where there has to be an increase on salaries, also this is not controllable by reinsurers. In addition, the retro cost is also not controlled by the reinsurers. So this is one of the items where we project, or we are already seeing changes on the acquisition cost. In terms of return on capital, return on capital is a shareholder expected return on capital deployed to support the underwriting risk. The return on capital is a combination between the cost of capital and the profit margin. Here, a higher interest rate may encourage the withdrawal of reinsurance capacity, looking for risk-free returns, which will result in shortage of reinsurance capacity. Now, reinsurance companies have a benefit of investing in the global financial market without taking any risk and having higher returns than whatever they were getting in the past. So therefore, in order to justify why they are still deploying capacities, their return need to be higher than whatever they can get in the market. So inflation is a rate of increase in prices over a given period. It's the overall increase in prices or the increase in the cost of living. The inflation rate is measured by looking at the consumer price index at over over a period of time. As you can see in this graph, this is the global inflation rate. In 2022, the inflation rate increased by over 200% compared to the average in the last 6 years, 2017 to 2020. It was in the range of 2 to 2.4, 2.5%. 2022, the global inflation rate is projected to be at 8.8 by year end, and for 2023 at 6.5%, which is very high compared to the previous years. Now, according to Swiss Re, the inflation rate will have different impact on different lines of business. On the life side, it has zero impact because the benefits are set on policy level, whereas on the non-life side, the impact was varying in 2022, and it will also change in 2023. For example, on the property side, the impact was high. However, for the impact in 2023 is expected to be above average, less than high, but still above average. And this is because of the price of materials peaked in 2022 and wage growth in 2023. However, when we say that the claims impact in 2023 is above average compared to 2022, but it's still on the high side compared to 2021 and before. In terms of motor, also motor MOD is expected to be on the average side. Motor TPL, it's expected to be above average as compared to below average. Liability is also the impact of inflation is expected to be above average. Health as well because of medical cost inflation, and the increase of the doctor wage is expected to be above average. So this is just a scenario where I will highlight the impact of inflation on the overall treaty, on specific treaty in this scenario. So we have this treaty which has been generating for us around $10 million on average for the last 5 years. On average, this treaty is producing 7% profit margin across the last 5 years, excluding the retro cost. 1 year only has been negative with -2 as -2. All the other years has been profitable, and the actual results show that this treaty looked good. However, although this may seem profitable, the results will deteriorate when we adjust the claims according to the accumulated inflation rate across the last years. So in 2017, we will apply the indexation of all the inflation rates from 2017 till the projected inflation rate in 2023, and we will apply the same on the incurred losses, and we'll see the impact for every year, the impact of inflation on the results. So after we apply the inflation, all the years turn negative. Now, this shows how inflation can basically have a huge impact on the results of the reinsurance company. And on the same side, also the same thing can happen on the retro treaty as well, or the retro program of the reinsurance company. Inflation will have impact as well. Here, of course, we are assuming that there is no rate movement, so there is zero rate movement across the years, and there is no currency devaluation. And the results has deteriorated by 15%. Of course, if there is negative rate movement over the years and weakening of the currency, this will have a further impact on the results. On the contrary, a positive rate movement and hardening of the currency will have a positive impact on the results. On the non-proportional side, the impact is even more than the proportional side, and this is if we assume that the deductible is the same. And this shows how important is for insurance and reinsurance company to consider increasing the deductibles to cover the inflation if they wish to maintain a reasonable Excel cost. So in this scenario, we have a treaty 8 million excess to 2 million. The total incurred losses across the last 6 years is 30.1 million, and the total recoveries is at 7.1 million after deducting the 2 million from each and every loss. After we applied the same indexation that we did on the proportional side, the the gross loss has increased by 20%. However, the treaty recoveries has increased by 60 to 70% to stand at 12.4 million. And this shows the importance of restructuring the treaties to maintain a reasonable Excel cost. Following the redistribution of the losses after applying the indexation, the burning cost has increased from 3.4% on average for 6 years to 5.9%, which is 60 to 70% increase. And of course, all the loading when it comes to the expense or the return on capital and the profit margin, including profit margin, plus the acquisition cost, it will be loaded on the 5.9%. Retro cost is another element contributing to the treaty reinsurance pricing for this 1/1/2023 renewal. Retro cat pricing is based on internationally accepted NatCat models, as highlighted by Dr. Vladimir. Results from the NatCat models can be on the conservative side as compared to recent experience. Although Mr. Mohamed Mahran has mentioned that in the absence of the NatCat models, the rates are somehow expensive, or there is some kind of loading because of the absence of the NatCat models for specific territories. But also on the contrary, these models has been on the conservative side as compared to the recent experience. So for example, in the past, we used to estimate a PML, let's say, of 3% on the aggregate sum insured for one country. And according to the model, the 1 to 250 PML is in the range of 5% on average. So which means as a reinsurance company, we need to buy more capacity, and of course, the cost will be extremely expensive, especially nowadays. And with a higher NatCat PML, that can lead to higher capital requirements in case we decide not to buy a higher capacity. Rating agency also looked at the result from this model, so it's very important for us to arrange our retro program according to the models. AM Best, for example, they looked at 1 in 250, and they will assess the reinsurer solvency ratio according to what they bought on their retro side. I have this example where it shows the impact of the retro pricing on a reinsurer portfolio in a specific country. So there is this reinsurance company operating in 20 territories. This company is buying $100 million limit per country, event limits. The cost of the retro is $10 million. According to the NatCat models, the highest exposure comes from 3 countries, and one country only is the cost allocated from the retro side is for that the peak country is $1.6 million. According to the reinsurer records, this country has been profitable historically. However, when that reinsurer digged in and did a study on that specific portfolio, it was observed that the retro cost was not being covered despite the book running at a combined ratio of 84% and all the treaties being profitable. The retro cost here of 1.6 million is not covered, neither the expense ratio. this country, for example, is the capacity of 100 million is almost exhausted to around 98.5 million dollars. The premium generated from that country is $10 million, giving an average balance of 10 to 1, and the profit before retro and expense ratio is 1.57. So as I highlighted, the retro cost is not being covered here despite the profitable results of the country. So now, going forwards, reinsurers will run similar exercises and check even if the profit from specific treaties has been profitable for the last 20 years. That doesn't mean for the reinsurer that that portfolio or that treaty is profitable. For example, in this case, season 4, 5, and 7, they are contributing to 32% of the exposure and possibly to 32% of the premium as well, but they're only generating a balance of 15%. So the reinsurer might consider to drop 4, 5, and 7, and whether they might consider buying a less capacity, around 70 million instead of 100 million, or they will consider reallocating that capacity to other seasons. And for those 3 seasons, they show that there have been profitable for all years. Sorry. Now our next example our next item driving the cost of capital up is the cost of capital. As I have highlighted earlier, the traditional capital is dropping, and it has dropped by 11% or 75 billion for the first half yearly of 2022. The cost of capital is basically driven by the capacity utilization. So with the decline of the available capital, the capital utilization ratio is going up and expected to go further up, which means that this will cause a drop to the solvency ratio of the companies, as the solvency ratio is defined as the available capital divided by the capital required or utilized. And this graph shows that how the capital utilization is increasing from 82% in 2021 to 88% in 2022. And of course, the less percentage is the capital utilization, the higher is the solvency ratio of the company. And the reinsurer will have to charge a higher profit margin to increase the available capital position and to have a lower capital utilization. In order to maintain strong rating, the minimum level of capital utilization would be required. Now, climate change, and this also has been explained by Dr. Vladimir, is also another item impacting the treaty reinsurance pricing. This graph shows the insured cat losses since the 1970s until 2021. And as you can see, the trend of the losses is going up. The average 10 years average nat cat loss is at $81 billion, where the average 10 years loss is at 81 billion, whereas 2021 losses are around 116 billion. And 2021 is the third largest insured loss when it comes to weather-related cat losses since 2011. Europe, Africa, and Asia, they contribute to 31% of the total losses in 2021. 2022, and because of Hurricane Ian, the nat cat losses till date is $115 billion, and this is the first time where we have 2 consecutive years where the nat cat losses exceed 100 billion per year. Regarding the climate change and its impact on the region and the nat cat losses in the region as compared to the globe, this slide is basically explaining why we are not too far from what's going on in other territories where there is a huge nat cat losses. For example, if I can start by saying that Hurricane Ian loss is estimated at $60 billion. But the insurance market, insurance premium in US is around 1.5 trillion dollars. Whereas if we compare, for example, Cyclone Shaheen in Oman, where the loss is $200 million, compared to a market of $1.5 billion, the percentage of the loss compared to the production is much higher than the loss of Ian compared to the production in the US. Similarly, of course, the intensity of the losses in the region is much less than the losses in other regions, but it does represent a high percentage of the total insurance premium accepted. So the region of Asia and the Middle East, in addition to Africa, is one of the most vulnerable to climate change. Both regions are warming at twice the global average. And this has been witnessed, for example, in Oman, where there was 4 tropical cyclones in the last 15 years, Gunu, Fat, Mukunu, and the recent Shaheen cyclone in 2021. Most of these events, the insured loss or the economic loss was somewhere between $500 million to $4.5 billion. There was also other events happened recently in 2022, such as Al Fujairah floods in UAE, Jeddah floods in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan floods, which is estimated, economic loss is estimated at $30 billion. Typhoon Odette in December 2021 in the Philippines. It was a Category 5 typhoon. Turkey, Algeria, Morocco wildfires. Most of these, all of these events are secondary perils and caused by climate change. Durban floods in South Africa, which happened early this year. According to AM Best, had Gunu reach been wider or focused on an area with higher insured values, the implication would have been profound on insurance companies. This event, if it happens across the GCC, it would have resulted in an estimated third of all companies requiring to recapitalize. AM Best estimate that the potential capital to be injected around 1.4 billion for an event such as Gunu affecting the whole of GCC. So climate change remain the main concern, a main concern to reinsurers, and reinsurers have increased their efforts to incorporate climate into their decision-making process, more specifically when it comes to exposure management and pricing. According to S&P, the physical climate risk could be underestimated by 33 to 50%. This unmodeled risk is a concern not only for reinsurers, but also for S&P as well. According to a survey by S&P done to the top 21 reinsurers, 80%, basically the survey was about if they are loading the price when it comes to the physical climate risk. 80% of the participants has said that they are charging up to 10% on average. But however, according to S&P, this loading does not seem adequate, and they are pushing the reinsurance companies to capture the risk of climate by adjusting the vendors, the NatCat models in their own in their NatCat exercises modeling. So geopolitical, of course, is also one of the items leading to increased pricing. Geopolitical tension pose challenges to society and, of course, to the reinsurance industry. It leads to increasing risks and demand for insurance protection, while at the same time, it causes a decline in supply. And reinsurers now for 1/1/2023 and earlier for the last few months has focused on the terms and conditions by particularly excluding war, terrorism, PV, even in territories where they are not affected by the war. But it's very hard nowadays to find the capacity on PV. In addition, on the retro side, many territories like Russia, Ukraine, and other territories involved in the war has been totally excluded from the coverage. So rate hardening is expected to reflect the higher risks and growing demand versus the decline in supply. As I have highlighted earlier, behind every challenge there is an opportunity, and for the insurance companies and for the regional insurers and other insurers as well, where they are seeking for retro capacity now, it's we should look at this situation as an opportunity and not only as a challenge, because the positive impact of whatever changes is happening now, it will have a positive impact on the overall organizations of the company in terms of the financial stability and the balance sheets of the companies. So as insurer companies, and in order to differentiate yourself, you would need to articulate clearly how you underwrite for inflation. You need to leverage data and analytics to differentiate your portfolio at renewal. You need to develop a custom view of risk to de-risk and reduce exposure concentration, specifically in zones where it's prone to nat cat losses. Understand the true cost of capital, including volatility of returns, which is critical to optimizing the long-term return on capital. Understand and consider exploring alternative structure for optimal placement results. Review the structure received by reinsurers versus the exposure, and check if the cover granted is properly assessed and priced within your organization. Finally, the reinsurance industry has absorbed volatility and proved resilient to many historical shocks and challenges. Despite the current challenges, the reinsurers remain a high source of capital and definitely in high demand. So reinsurers has withstood the test of time and remains a valuable source of capital during uncertain periods. So this is it from my side. I hope this added value and that was beneficial for everyone. Thank you again for the invitation, and I look forward to answer any questions you may have. Mr. Mohamed, you are on mute.
Sorry, thank you so much indeed. Thank you so much indeed, Nader. This is very interesting. Still, the insurance companies will consider that no matter all what you have said, Nader, and what Dr. Vladimir said, still, I have to be treated separately and differently. But this is really interesting. At least it tells us what are the problems from the shortage of capacity, from the expense of the retro. I mean, many companies actually, when they look at the pricing of their treaties or reinsurance programs, actually forget that the reinsurance themselves are actually having further difficult times with the retro market, trying to obtain the capacity in order to provide decent capacity to the ceding companies. But this is very enlightening, Nader, and thank you so much indeed. This is very helpful. I'll go back now to Mr. Mohamed Marhoun. Thank you, Mr. Mohamed, for so patient with us. It has always been, I mean, you are a very well-known figure, particularly in the region here. You worked in the direct insurance company, in the reinsurance company, and now in an international reinsurance broker. And always we had the tendency, when we have difficulties with our renewals and our treaty programs, or it doesn't look so nice, we run to the brokers and tell them, you have to sort my problems. You have to justify the brokerage you are earning. Now all the insurance companies now are in this sticky situation. From the reinsurance broker point of view, what can be offered or what can be done to bridge the gap so that it is not too harsh on the insurance companies, right? And at the same time, I mean, in any case, we have to buy the reinsurance protection. But what we can do to buy reinsurance protection at adequate terms and conditions, and at the same time with reasonable prices. The floor is yours, Mohamed. Fadl.
Shukran, Mr. Mohamed. It's a pleasure to be here. It's interesting to see how the presentation developed. We started with the direct side, then the modeling side. Vladimir gave us a lot of good information. And then we went to the reinsurer and now go back to the broker to solve the problems. Yeah. So it's a good question what you have asked. And I think we should start by acknowledging that the market is going hard. We need to acknowledge that first, because when we acknowledge that, we go to the next stage. And the next stage is to build strategies to navigate through the hard market, or to try to find solutions. And one of the items that my colleague said in the presentation is the quality of data. And this is what we're facing in the region. The better quality that you have over a spread of years, the less uncertainty reinsurers will have, the better pricing that you will get. So it's really about what we're trying to do as brokers to try to help clients to get understand their portfolio, to get the information. We start building statistics and triangulation from zero with them, and then try to understand their risk profile, their profile, and then go to the reinsurers to find the best possible and placeable solution during this period. Because like what my colleague Mohamed said from Amari, retro market is hardening. We know some reinsurers, they don't buy retro anymore because it's very expensive. So reinsurers need to be very careful about their pricing and what kind of coverage they're trying to provide. We can always come up with smart, creative solutions, but we cannot do that with just having the typical data set that we always see is just sending the typical renewal set and expect to have a better price. For us, we try to use the tools that we have in two ways. We have the qualitative and the quantitative analysis, and to go to people such as Amari and tell them, you know what, how can we bridge the gap between you and the cedant? Can we, for example, take part of that limit, which maybe is not needed for the client? Because especially in the region, I noticed personally, especially in Saudi, that we're buying, companies are buying more than 250 years limit, which in my opinion, they don't need. It's just the practice was getting, I don't know, 10 times of this, 5 times of this. So that's why it's really important to use the CAT modeling that brokers like us provide to really understand, where do I stand with my exposure? Am I buying enough? Am I buying a lot? So, and one thing that we try to help clients, and we faced this earlier, is do you need that cover? Can you take, because after having a soft market, everyone is giving a lot of add-ons, a lot of options in their original policy, and such. That come from reinsurance, not for free. So we tell client, do you really need to sell this product? Can you convince your client that this exotic additions, you don't need them to get a better price or not? So it really evolves around how we see the risk appetite of the client and connect it with what's going on in the reinsurance market, because there is a disconnection that everyone believes that the market is not hardening. It's like every renewal, and it's hard. That's why I'm saying we need to acknowledge first there is a hard market, and then we build the strategy to navigate across that or through the hard market. And for example, like what Mohamed, my colleague, said from Maori, because of inflation, attachment points are hit from the claims. So what we usually do, we take all those figures, we put them in our dynamic financial analysis and see if we increase the attachment point, will that be beneficial for the insured or the cedant? Because sometimes increasing it is not necessarily the right thing, because getting reinsurance protection will benefit you on the short term and the long term, because you're spreading those losses. And also, for example, when we restructured the CAT model, the CAT program, like Vladimir said, we try to see what's the peak exposure, and then we decide, okay, do you really need that? Or can we customize your purchase for each region? For example, I know Jeddah has a lot of floods, so I'll buy for Jeddah only. I will not buy from that for example, the eastern part. So there is a lot of creative solutions, but we need to first acknowledge that the market is hard.
Sure, Mohamed. Really appreciate it, and definitely, I think many of the insurance companies now are recognizing or actually admitting that it is going to be hard. And in my humble opinion, it will not be hard only this renewal. It will be actually hard for the next few years. So the companies need to be prepared for that. As you mentioned, Mohamed, that in my previous company, one of the companies that I have been proud to serve, they do every 5 years, they bring some consultants to review our portfolio and then to see what is the best fitting reinsurance program, because the reinsurance program cannot be renewed as expiry every year, whereas your portfolio either growing or you are walking away from some of the lines of business. So this is what we call it optimization of the reinsurance program. Sometimes you have to, like Mr. Mohamed Mahran mentioned in the beginning of his presentation, that you need to be careful or to reconsider the leakage of the reinsurance costs, that you don't need to buy something that you don't need. And you have actually complemented that by giving the example in Saudi Arabia, there are certain areas that are exposed to flood, but perhaps these are the ones that are most critical for you to buy rather than to buy for the whole country, particularly if the whole country is not exposed as in the West Coast or something like that. But this is actually very interesting, but definitely the insurance market and insurance companies have to identify or recognize that the times are different now, and they have to consider each stone. They have to flip each stone to see whether this is required or not. The increase on the retention, it can be something good. It will save them something. But also, again, when you consider the devaluation of some of the currencies, the increase in the retention might kill some of the small companies. So perhaps this is also a time for small companies to consider or to think of acquisitions or mergers, because one small company, in my opinion, will have difficulty standing or surviving in front of the major changes taking place in the insurance and reinsurance industry. So, I mean, this is very helpful, but thank you so much indeed. We'll come back again to all your good selves again. But I have one question here that I would like, if you don't mind, I will address it to Dr. Vladimir. Dr. Vladimir, if you are hearing, thank you for being with us. One of our reputable participants is asking about the calculation of the non-proportional treaties in layers pricing, such as CAT excessive loss, using the stochastic modeling or the CURE or alpha modeling. Could you kindly just give us your views about this question from one of the participants?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr.
Yes, sure. Nice question. So normally, of course, stochastic modeling is always our preference. And this is something which we use in those cases where we have a proper outputs of a catastrophe modeling. So, for example, when we do the modeling of non-proportional cat-XL treaty, let's use an example. I will use as an example India, where we have various catastrophe model for earthquake and typhoon, and the stochastic representation covers 10,000 years, right? So in this particular case, we have all the possible typhoon events, all the possible earthquake events that might happen over the period of 10,000 years. It covers small events, it covers major extremes, so all the volatility is properly captured by the model. One can say there is hardly anything which can be missing, and then basically all those events are run through the cat-XL contract. So basically, you create a stochastic simulations, and basically you calculate how the losses are recovered from this contract for this 10,000 year stochastic stochastic period for both events, earthquake and typhoon, including multiple events per year, including extreme volatility of the top layers, which is driven by the extreme tail event. So that would be a great example of the usage of the stochastic cat model for the modeling of non-proportional catastrophe XL treaties. The Q or alpha models, it's something which I have to admit I don't have much experience with. It would be something which we will certainly use in this case, where we model other treaty or other line of business than property cat, where the proper probabilistic robust model doesn't exist, or it might be a very relevant solution for those territories. And we saw in my presentation there are many of them within the scope of FAIR where no catastrophe model is available. So, but in that case, that would require at least some loss experience data or some other inputs to the model generated by other than stochastic models. So to say in the conclusion, of course, from the catastrophe modeling perspective, the stochastic model is always the preference, but in many cases, this needs to be supplemented by the real loss experience if it exists, because even if the catastrophe models are developed by very well-established companies which employ lots of scientists and engineers, the stochastic, the loss experience, the real loss experience of the particular insurance company might be, of course, more relevant and more accurate.
Thank you so much indeed, Doctor. Really appreciate it. Doctor, I have seen your very interesting presentation, and as one who had served in the insurance direct insurance companies more than in the reinsurance, I know that the cornerstone starts from the collection of data, and you have mentioned that particularly you yourself and Mohamed and all my friends here, that particularly in some of the countries there is a big problem in collecting the appropriate data, and I would appreciate, first of all, I have got a lot of very positive feedback. It's not talking about me, but talking about the distinguished speakers here, all of you. I mean, really, very, very distinguished, and I'm really honored that you are here with us. They have asked also the permission to share the presentations, and definitely our standard is that we'll not do it until we get your explicit permission. But if you are going to do that, I may ask something on their behalf, Dr. Vladimir, if you allow me. If you can include in your presentation one slide of the data that are essential to capture for proper CAT modeling, so that at least the companies will start from now to adjust their IT systems, start to ask these questions, rather than every time they present the data to the reinsurer or the insurance broker, they will complain about the quality and integrity of the data, and at the same time, we don't know what data they want. So perhaps that will be helpful also for the audience and participants. By the way, one time we have exceeded 240 participants, and throughout the four or the three previous presentations we have run, this is the highest, the largest number of participants in this webinar. So again, thank you so much indeed. Now going back to Mr. Mohamed Mahran, if you allow me. Mr. Mohamed Mahran, all the forces in the reinsurance industry are actually throwing back the blame on the direct insurance companies. Not blame, but first they wanted them to understand the difficulties. And actually I have worked, I mean, I'm not like, of course, Mr. Nader or Dr. Vladimir or Mr. Mohamed Marwoon or your good self, but I have worked only for 4 years in a reinsurance company. And I really understand the suffering the reinsurance company face in the retro market and to get the capacity. So do you think, Mr. Mohamed, that it is time also for the insurance companies here in the market, not in Egypt, but particularly I'm talking about the direct insurance, also to consider the rating levels, the deductibles levels the very loose policy wordings where they cover everything, you know, and at the same time, when you allocate the premium in pockets, you find that the premium you have collected supposedly for all the perils, like in the fire, you charge something for the fire basic or the flexa or the fire basic cover, some for the like the natural perils and so on. But actually, all those premiums are kept in one pocket, and they pay only for the fire incidents, and hardly they're sufficient. So currently, in many of the markets in the region here, are making losses from the basic, you know, fire losses, and there is no fund is being built up for the cat exposure. What message would you like to send to the direct insurance market before we send the criticism or the you know poke the reinsurers, telling them that you are, you know, harsh guys and so on? I know they are harsh, you know, but not Oman Re, I'm sure. but but I want to say that we have also problems ourselves that we need to look at. What is your message, Mr. Mohamed?
Sure. First, thank you very much. And I think also, to be very frank, I believe I am personally get a lot of benefit. And if you call my earlier speech, I started with the message to the direct insurance companies. And I said to my colleagues that some of them seem basic. However, I think we should be reminded, and no doubt of what you are saying is correct. I think now we are in a difficult time for everyone, started from the layman in the street until very sophisticated reinsurance companies. We see many of the giant reinsurance companies, they started to suffer and they started really to make real losses. So it's quite clear. It's a risk and the push to everyone. And I think we will need, all of us, to have some sort of balance. We are sitting sometimes on a different sides of the table. However, in my view, we are all needs to be successful. We are all needs to navigate through this difficult tidal waves. We see it, we know how it is. Reinsurers are suffering, insurance companies are suffering more. Probably the direct client who is coming to purchase for us are suffering more and more, because remember, people are receiving such a challenge time. For example, currency devaluation, for example, inflation, for example, probably what Nasser has mentioned also, from increasing the G&A and the other expenses, it goes all over, it goes to everyone. So we need to find somewhere some sort of compromise. So insurance companies, of course, it goes without saying that, and you also mentioned, Mr. Momin, that you are giving an invitation to the direct insurance companies to consider merger and acquisition, because the situation is so dangerous that smaller companies will do. But this is not only for the smaller ones, it's also for the bigger ones. It's also for very, very big. And if we put our hands together, if the reinsurance with full respect to the retro and with full respect to the reducing the capacity and everything we are all facing, I believe we need to have some sort of consideration. Consideration would be good. We have been loyal, and I'm sure many of my colleagues still do, loyal to the reinsurance market. And it is not unusual. This wouldn't be the last crisis or the last challenge we will face. We will be facing this. And we will be facing not necessarily, you mentioned 1 or 2 years, decade, we will have a different things. So to put this together, and we maintain our loyalty to the reinsurance panel, we maintain relying on our friends in the broker and their understanding, and to taking our voice and to put it maybe comes to the closer ear of the reinsurers and saying, listen, these guys are really suffering. We need to have this. It's not only the reinsurance direct. We do hear the challenge also the reinsurance market or reinsurance companies are facing, but we are all on it. It's time where we are all should listen to each other. So we are all should we say the pain. Even I said in part of my presentation that this pain is not necessarily as a direct consequence of the Reinsurance Act. It is not at all. It is a situation we are all found ourselves in it. No victims, and we wouldn't be victims. We should all put our hands together in order we all win. And I agree with Nasser that every crisis or every challenge comes with opportunity, and we see the opportunity comes for smarter people to be there. Thanks again, and happy to take any other question.
Shukran, Mr. Mohamed, really appreciate it. By the way, Mr. Nader, always people are confusing your name. So sometimes Mohamed and sometimes Nader, but I'm sure you are taking it with light hearts. Mr. Nader, now you can tell me, please, if you are, if you allow me to ask this question on behalf of the participants. Now, what can we do? Do we need to go and hit the direct insurance companies in one go, or perhaps we can take that gradually? And during the next year, perhaps you will be sitting together as a reinsurer, or sitting together with your clients, walk them away through the protection they are buying, where they can save money, where they actually are not buying enough capacity, or will always keep that gap between the two parties. Direct insurance companies think that we are being taken advantage of by the reinsurers, and reinsurers are not. They want to continue the relationship, particularly with the loyal clients. But there is always a gap of understanding. What do you think, Mr. Nader?
I think, Mr. Mu'min, for this 1/1/2023 renewals, I think the changes is mostly to do with inflation. Now, the impact of inflation will be actualized and will be clearer to reinsurer by next year, or by end of next year. We'll have a better picture when it comes to inflation and the impact on the losses. I don't see for 1/1/2023, from what we have seen so far, that the impact is more than that. For example, as I have highlighted earlier, when it comes to climate change, out of the top 21 reinsurers, most of them, they are saying they are loading the price from 0 to 10%, but there are still reinsurers not loading for the physical risk of climate. And this unmodeled part of the climate, it's still not in the tools. It's still the data is not available, and it's not being modeled for the time being, which means it's not being charged. So, in my opinion, in the next years, we will see rates hardening more than 1/1/2023. Actually, the rates were hardening for the last 2 years, or at least I can say for the last 2 years, there was no drop in rates as we have seen before 2020, where sometimes we see discounts of 10%, 15%, 7%. For the last 2 years, we have not seen that. And this demonstrates what you have highlighted as well, that the increase in prices will go for several years and not only for this 1/1/2023. The retro market is very, very difficult. And at the same time, reinsurers, they need to buy retro to maintain the solvency ratio. And if the solvency ratio is declining, this means a straight downgrade on their rating. And they need to bear that cost. And to answer also Mr. Mahran, he mentioned that he looks for a long-term partnership with reinsurer. There are insurance companies, not opportunistic. I come from school where I have this philosophy, and there is always commercial sense in the underwriting decisions. And definitely for 1/1, there will be commercial decisions, but at the end of the day, there are red lines which we cannot cross as underwriters. We can go to the minimum that is still there. However, that will need to be adjusted for the next years as well. So there are still commercial sense. The relationship between the insurance and reinsurance company has always been on, excellent relationship and partnership and all of that, and that is still there. And I think if that is not there, we would have seen much worse scenarios than now.
Okay, thank you so much indeed, Mr. Nader. Now, I think we have come to a conclusion. I think this is a perfect timing because it's almost now 2 o'clock. Again, I apologize for the internet interruption that has taken place at the beginning, and I'm sorry that if I missed the introduction of any of your good selves, but I will send that definitely to, if you allow me, to our participants. As I mentioned that at one point in time, we have exceeded 240 participants, which shows the interest and the reputation, of course, of you as speakers. I will now thank backwards the reputable speakers, Mr. Mohamed Marhoun, who has been very patient with us. Mr. Mohamed Marhoun, you need now to work hard with the direct insurance companies and with reinsurers, and you know where are the screws and where to tighten, and who are the reinsurers that you can put like some of the pressure, because you are one of the biggest producers for them to get the direct insurance companies a good deal. So thank you very much indeed, Mr. Mohamed Marhoun, for being with us. Mr. Nader Anesi, thank you so much indeed for the insights. We look forward for you to continue to be a long-term partner with the direct insurance companies, because it is a long-term partnership and it is not one of the others taking advantage of the other party. Dr. Vladimir, thank you so much indeed for being with us. It has been an honor. Mr. Mohamed Mahran, really appreciate your presence here and the giving the perception of the direct insurance companies. All the respect and thanks and really appreciation of your being with us here and with the time you have spent. I would like also to thank all of our participants who have been with us here listening to your views, and we look forward to seeing you again in our future webinars. Thank you very much indeed, and have a great day, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
بارك الله فيك. في امان الله. مع السلامه. Thank you, sir.
Goodbye.
Bye bye. Bye bye, doctor. Bye bye.